But yes, we are not moving on to chapter 6 yet. We are going to be looking at some specifics on chapter 5. Now, this is going to be one of those, those Toledot, those Toledot things. But you'll find here as we continue on why it's important, not only because it establishes the Messianic line. I mean, that's obviously the most important reason the Bible tells us all of these generations. It shows the fulfillment of the promise all the way from Adam and Eve, all the way forward to the birth of Christ. And that's one of the reasons that the Jewish writers were so intent on telling us who fathered who, so that we can actually trace the fulfillment of the promise that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Second reason that Jewish writers tell us about who begat who, as you see from the King James, is the inheritance of the promised land. When God promised the descendants of Abraham that they would inherit the promised land, when they actually conquered it under the leadership of Joshua, they divided it up by tribes, and within each tribal area, each family and genealogy within those families inherited specific portions of it, and it was passed along to the next generation. And that's why it was so important to them to know who you descended from, because that told them not only where you were from, but what part of the promised land actually belonged to you. And if you sold the land for whatever reason, maybe you were destitute, you couldn't pay your bills, God established what he called the year of Jubilee, which was every 50th year, that it didn't matter who sold it or where it went to, it went back in that 50th year back to the original landowners to continue that continuity of the promised land. Now in this third one, we're going to look at the third reason that this Toledot, or these genealogies, are provided to us. And this is the part that I'm actually going to show you here visually, because it'll be real easy for you to follow if I write it out. But if I just tell you, you'll kind of lose track. Can you see past my thick body?
No, I might have to vote.
All right. Now,
You just don't mind.
first one who was in fact created was Adam, right? Now, what does the name Adam mean? We all should know that one. Man. All right. Then from Adam, who is the next person? Not the first one born, but who is the next in the Messianic line? Seth. All right. Now with Seth, Eve even told us what that name means, because she said that in place of Abel, because Cain killed him, God has what? Appointed me another heir. So Seth, actually in Hebrew, literally means appointed. However, also in Hebrew, this word Seth, by the way, I know their names, but each of these names actually has a literal meaning in Hebrew. Just like, for example, how many have ever met a lady whose name is Faith? Has a meaning to it. Hope. For some reason, girls, at least in English, tend to have more often names that actually have a meaning in English than boys do. Although some boys have names. For example, the name David. Kind and our older son is named David. In Hebrew, which is actually a Hebrew name, it literally means beloved. But there's a second meaning for the word Seth, which is substitute. All right. Now, after Seth, who was the third one?
Enosh.
Enosh. Now, Enosh also is one of those words that has two meanings. Now, sometimes, and again, this is one of those things that depends on the context. We have words that mean 2, 3, or 4 different things, depending on the context, don't we? What's the meaning of the word through, spelled T-H-R-O-U-G-H?
Finished.
Means what?
Finished.
Finish, but what if I'm going through a tunnel?
Means it's a direction.
Same word, different meaning. Completely different meaning. Just an example. Well, Enosh is one of those words, depending on the context, has two meanings. One is frail. The other is mortal. And you can see how in Hebrew those two might be related, because if you're mortal, you're what? Or frail, or vice versa.
Or able to be killed.
Yeah, you're able to be killed. All right. Who's the next in the line there?
Kenan.
Kenan. All right. And Kenan's name means sorrow, or sometimes dwelling. All right. Now the next one. Anybody want to try their luck at pronouncing the next one?
Mahalalel.
Yeah.
Malahel?
What's that?
Malahid?
Mahalalel.
Yeah, he hit it dead. Merrill here hit it dead on the target. Mahalalel. Now, anytime you see that word L on the end, of course, what is that?
God.
That's the name for God. Just frequently you'll find Hebrew names that are derivatives or close, have an EL on the end for L. Mahalalel.
Okay.
And then his name means,
All the spellings are wrong.
what's that?
You spelled everybody of these wrong.
I'm sure I probably did. All right.
Sorry.
It sometimes means the blessed God, or it could also be translated as the praise God or the praise of God. Because you'll recall from some of the times I've explained to you in Hebrew how things, you have what's called that construct meaning. Who remembers what the construct is in Hebrew? Anybody remember? That's the Hebrew equivalent of a possessive. If I say, your chair right there, that's Larry's chair. Larry apostrophe S chair. But what's the other way we could say that and it'd still be a possessive?
Chair belongs to Larry.
Well, no, just
Chair
chair of Larry.
Okay.
That's the way Hebrew normally would do a possessive, only they leave out the word of. If you see two nouns together, in this case it would be chair Larry. In Hebrew, they would read that and understand that would mean the chair of Larry. That's how they do a possessive. So when you see Mahalal and then El, that literally is saying whatever this word means, of God. And in this particular case, it's the blessing or the praise of God. So, I hope I don't run out of room here. Because I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I can roll my big one in if you need.
Well, I might. You might have to, because I might run out of room here because I've still got 3 after that to go. Can you go get me the big one and bring it in here while I continue? All right, the next one.
Jared.
Jared. All right. Now, keeping in mind, Hebrew does not have a future tense. Anybody remember what tenses Hebrew's got? It's only got 2.
Present and perfect.
Present and perfect, that's it. The only way you can tell a future tense in Hebrew is if you add a word like tomorrow or next year, something like that. That's the only way you can tell a future tense, or by the context. For example, if I'm standing here in this room and I tell you, I go to town. Well, you know I'm not going to town right now because I'm standing here. So the context would tell you that I must be talking about I am going to go to town. That's the only way you can tell a future tense in Hebrew. Either an extra word added to it or by the context. Now, if, as some people have theorized, thank you, ma'am, as some people have theorized that Hebrew may in fact be the original human language and also a heavenly language, it would explain why it has no future tense. Because there is no such thing as a future in God's eyes. What is God? He's an eternal what? Well, he's an eternal present. That's why God told Moses that his name was I am. He never said that he will be or that he was, just I am. With God, everything is an eternal present. So if in fact Hebrew is the heavenly language, they wouldn't have a need for future tense. But, now that all comes to this. Jared in Hebrew means come down or descend. And in the context that we're going to see, you probably is talking about a future tense. That the name interpreted in Hebrew, and I'm just going to throw the future tense in here for our benefit because you'll see why shortly, means shall come down or shall descend. And for the sake of space here, I'm going to leave out the come down and just put descend. And I'll write one more, and that's as far as I can lean over without killing my back. I'll go over to that one. Next item up for bids.
Enoch.
Enoch. Now,
Who didn't die.
who did not die.
And he's the 7th generation from Adam.
He is. All right. Enoch, his name, means teaching, or in some context, discipline. Not disciple, but discipline. But if you are learning to be disciplined, if you are disciplining a child, what are you doing?
Making a disciple of them.
You're teaching them. You're making a disciple out of them. So, depending on the context, Enoch sometimes means teaching, sometimes it means discipline. And now I'm going to go over to that other one because as far as I can lean over. All right, and of course, Enoch's child was who?
Methuselah.
Methuselah. Bring this over here.
You can tilt that, can't you? Right.
What's that?
You can tilt that one, can't you? To right on it better.
Well, it could, but then if I did that, you probably wouldn't be able to see it.
He'd be alright.
Yeah, I think.
My wife don't care.
He'd be alright.
Okay.
She just assumes I'm
She
going to
don't
be all
care
right.
if you bend over.
Yeah. Doesn't hurt her a bit.
No. No.
Did it hurt?
Not a bit.
What's that?
She asked if it hurt, and I said not a bit.
Don't feel thing.
Yeah. I can assure you, Connie did not feel a thing.
There you go.
All right, now, here's one I think Bruce actually mentioned Sunday night. Bruce, you remember what Methuselah means?
His death shall bring.
His death shall bring. Also, that future tense there, in context, it literally just means his death brings. All right. on your dry whiteboard keeps rocking.
Sorry.
Now, in context, Methuselah's name, and here's you're going to start seeing the point of all this, because this one's going to raise your eyebrows. In context, Methuselah's name can mean speared by man. Not spared, speared. All right. Okay, boss, what's the next one?
Lamech.
Lamech. All right. And Lamech's name means despairing or dying. Also, the interesting thing, since his name also means dying, Lamech died just before the flood came. He was the father of Noah. If he'd have survived, he'd have died in the flood. And by the way, it's something for us to keep in mind. I'm going to mention this before I continue on and get to Noah. How many of all of these generations in chapter 5 that we studied, all of them after Moses wrote out the Messianic line, it then says, and he had what? Other sons and daughters. But how many people were on the ark? Only 8 of them. Which, guess what? That tells you about all the brothers and the sisters. Except for those that died before the flood, which, would have been some of them. At least everybody from probably around Kenan or Mahalalel on down would have died in the flood. If they lived what was then a normal lifespan. And we know Noah. Noah had brothers and sisters. But notice, not a one of them was on the ark with him. Yes, sir.
I've heard that Methuselah means till it comes, and he lived until the flood. Now, is that wrong, or does that kind of fit in your first name?
That fits in there with his death shall bring, or until, his death till it comes. You'll see how that would fit into the context of this. All depends on how you translate it.
Okay.
That's one of the problems you run into anytime you're translating one language into another. We always assume that in English that, things translate directly from one language to another. Anybody that's ever studied a foreign language knows rarely does something translate directly into another language. There's always nuances of meaning. Sometimes there's words that, in fact, that's true of Hebrew. There are words in Hebrew that are in the original Hebrew text. There is no translation for it. That they're simply not present in the Hebrew. It's not that we've lost meaning. It's, for example, Hebrew has a word that actually indicates what the direct object is going to be in a sentence. Well, we tell a direct object simply by the context. If I say, I whip up my wife, of course, naturally after that is she kills me.
Right, William is now dead.
But if I whip my wife, we tell that my wife is a direct object of me whipping, whereupon I will be the direct object of her killing right after that. But in Hebrew, it actually has a word that would say, she kills, then that Hebrew word me. There's things like that in languages that simply don't translate. Greek, in the New Testament Greek, has got stuff that doesn't translate directly into English. So those are some of the things, anytime, You know, if you're looking in some of your commentaries or your Bible notes and it may say, well, this means this, and you're looking and it's like, well, that doesn't read what my Bible says. That's because of differences in the translation. And Hebrew, for you linguists in here that like to study languages, I know like Merrill does, Hebrew is considered linguistically a primitive language, which means there's a lot of ambiguity into it. One word can have a dozen different meanings. And because of the fact written Hebrew doesn't have any vowels, one word in the written Hebrew could actually be, represent 4, 5, or 6 different words in Hebrew. All depends on the context. It's hard to tell exactly. And that's just one of the problems you run into with translation. All right, the last one. Noah.
Comfort,
What's that?
comfort.
Rest or comfort?
A lot of attributes of Christ up there.
What's that?
A lot of attributes of Christ up there.
Well, that's what you're about to see here. Now, if we start with Adam, notice what the translation of each of these words, these names in the Messianic line, what it points to. Man, oh, by the way, before I even go into that, the word is, what we call the be verb in English. Hebrew has one, but it rarely actually uses it except for emphasis. Connie's my wife. In Hebrew, you would just say, Connie, wife. You'd understand that's the be verb. In English, we would say, Connie is my wife. They don't need that in Hebrew unless I was going to say, Connie is my wife. You only have it for emphasis. By the way, the name of God, when he says, I am, in that one it's always written out. Because, well, if Hebrew normally leaves out the be verb except for emphasis, anytime you're talking about God, guess what? You can't get any more emphasized than that. So it's always written out with him. But the word for God, Yahweh, is a form of the word in Hebrew that also is translated as I am. But anyway, now, so man is appointed mortal sorrow or immortal dwelling. The blessed God shall descend, teaching, and his death shall bring the despairing comfort. Now notice if we use the alternate meanings here. Man had, we have an understood has a substitute for mortality. Dwelling where?
Heaven.
Nope, dwelling right here with us. In other words, we have a substitute
With us, Emmanuel.
for mortality, dwelling with us. That's the implication here. Also, you have he is the praise of God, or the blessed God shall descend. Not only is he teaching, but what else did God do while he was teaching? What does he do for us if we are his children?
Discipline.
He disciplines us. And his death shall bring, notice also the alternate meaning, depending on the context, speared by man.
Pierced for our transgressions.
Pierced for our transgressions. Dying, which brings us rest and comfort. What you have there, no matter how you read it, you have from start to finish, from Adam to Noah, the gospel message prophesied 2,000 years before Christ came.
So how did the parent of each of those childs know to give them a name that meant that? That's just happenstance, huh?
Oh, just coincidence.
Smack him.
Total coincidence. Now, we're going to talk about briefly here about Shem, Ham, and Japheth. This, I don't really need this. I'm just going to set it aside. Now, the Bible tells us Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Which of those 3 was in the Messianic line?
Shem.
Shem. Anybody know what in Hebrew what the name Shem means? It literally means name. Noah named his son name. I kid you not. Shem literally means name. Now, why would that be important? Because when you call upon the Lord, what does the Bible tell us that those who call upon what are saved? The name of the Lord. Shem, Ham, and Japheth were the 3 that actually survived the flood. And the one in the Messianic line was the name. And it is through him that we call upon the name of the Lord. Now, Ham, on the other hand, Ham literally means hot. Of Noah's 3 sons, which of the 3 rebelled?
Ham.
Ham. So what? Yeah, not only was he probably a hothead, but what was he destined for?
Sin.
And his name meant hot. The last one, Japheth. His name means deception.
Well, those are not awesome names to give your children.
Lucky they didn't name you appropriate, Connie.
I know where you live.
All right. Now, you may wonder, why deception?
Yes.
Well, of course, the descendants of Ham are also the ones that gave rise a few generations later in the land of Canaan to those giants in the land, the one that God told the Israelites to wipe them out. They were the ones destined for destruction. And of course, Ham's name meant hot. Of those later on, generations later, that gave rise to all of the other, especially the northern tribes that we see later, thousands of years later in the book of Revelation, that will later invade Israel and who will probably give rise to the Antichrist. Guess who they descended from?
Japheth.
Japheth, the one of deception. Do you think maybe God knew what he was doing?
Only he knows.
Working all around our free will, too.
Now, I'll throw one last thing in there and then we'll be done for the night. Now, I realize at this point I'm actually jumping forward to chapter 7. Chapter 7 and 8. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Well, I'm just going to point it out here. I'm not going to get all that deep into it. But we all know that after the flood, of course, this tells you Noah wasn't perfect either, because what's one of the first things Noah did?
Got drunk.
He planted himself a vineyard, brewed himself up some wine, and got wasted. So, somewhere in that process, it says Ham, of course, in the King James and some of the newer ones, it basically says that he uncovered his father's nakedness. And there have been all kinds of theories as to what does that mean. But in Hebrew, to uncover your father's nakedness is a euphemism that says you got involved in some sexual activity. Well, if Ham uncovered his father's nakedness while his father was passed out drunk, does it take too much imagination to realize what Ham probably did and why then later he was bragging about it? Ham went in and sexually abused his own father, which tells you why Noah was livid when he finally sobered up and realized, in fact, the Bible even says, when he realized what Ham had done. But you'll notice in that passage, Noah did not curse his son. He cursed his grandson. And you may wonder, okay, Ham's the one that did it. Why would Noah curse his grandson instead of having at it with his own son? First off, I have no doubt Noah probably did have it out with Ham. We're just not told about it. But as to why he would curse his grandson,
Generations.
you're on the right track.
Sons that already received the blessing, right?
Well, maybe. But I would propose to you there may have been a different issue involved. Notice that we know that the godly line of Seth survived the flood. Because, I mean, we've traced them all the way down from Adam all the way to Noah and then Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But what 4 individuals in this do we not know the lineage of?
Women.
The women. We have no way of knowing who Now we can assume Noah's wife was of pure blood because Shem, Ham, and Japheth, we're told, were of pure lineage. But we don't have a clue where Shem, Ham, and Japheth got their wives from. We assume that the line of Cain was wiped out by the flood. That's an assumption that we cannot make because we don't know who Shem, Ham, and Japheth married. And we know their wives were present on the ark, but we don't know their names and we don't know their lineage. I would propose to you, and again, this is just a theory, I would propose to you that Ham's wife may have been of the cursed lineage that is involved in this, which, and by the way, this is what we're going to study on Sunday. Well, actually, Sunday, and it may take till sometime later next week before we get that far, because this coming Sunday, we're just going to study verses 1 through 4. But when we get to the part where it talks about the sons of God and the daughters of men, and I will do, well, actually, we will get to that on Sunday, sorry. There is a very significant probability that fallen angels may have gotten involved with human women against God's will, which is why God cursed a whole lot of them and consigned them to die in a flood so that their DNA could not be passed along to the next generation. Well, here's the variable in this. What if Ham's wife was of that lineage, and therefore Ham's son, Noah's grandson, would have in fact had some of that DNA, which would explain why when Noah pronounced a curse on them, he didn't curse Ham, he cursed Canaan. And later, whenever, and by the way, Ham's son that Noah cursed, yeah, his name was Canaan. And later on, the land that was named after that particular son, the land of Canaan, where were those giants in the land found during the conquest? The land of Canaan. Starting to all come together now?
Yeah.
That would explain why Noah cursed Canaan, because Noah, realizing what Ham had done and knowing what was coming. Now, by the way, I will throw this one thing out
So
here.
would that make Noah a prophet?
He probably was, but we don't know that for sure. There's one thing, though, that I'll throw out that you may come across occasionally. Maybe some of you already have. There are some people that would claim that the descendants of Ham, because of Noah's curse, were the ones that were born in Africa of dark skin. There is absolutely zero, I mean no biblical evidence whatsoever to indicate that those of dark skin had anything to do with Noah's curse. First off, keep in mind that just because Noah pronounced a curse, does that have the effect of God cursing them? No. Noah was mad and Noah cursed them. And Noah may have been a prophet, I mean, for all we know, The Bible doesn't say was or wasn't. But to make the assumption that Noah's curse caused all of Ham's kids to have dark skin absolutely cannot be supported biblically. There is no support for it whatsoever. And also, if that were true, how many black people do you know of that are indeed children of God?
Plenty.
Plenty of them. Has no effect on it whatsoever. It's just it's absolutely nothing more than just a genetic variation.
The Australian Aborigines and the Indians aren't descended from Ham, are
No, not a bit.
they? And they have dark skin just as
Oh yeah,
dark as
especially the
people in
Aborigines.
Africa. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
Is there any connection? I've heard this argument with Ham that the Eastern cultures were descendants of Ham, and that's why Paul was diverted from going that direction because of that heritage. I mean, yeah.
Who
It's
knows?
one of those again. That's what I figured. Yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah.
the
yeah.
Chinese were descended from Shem,
Yeah.
not Ham. The
Mhm.
Chinese, and I believe the Indians as well. So the
And-
Eastern Asians were mostly descended from Shem.
And actually,
along with the Hebrews.
there is strong archaeological and linguistic evidence to indicate that the Chinese people prior to the time of Christ were in fact godly people. When I say godly, I don't mean some of these Eastern religions that you see coming out of China now. I'm talking about bona fide godly people. That it was because of the rise of some of those false religions that began to overshadow the true teaching of God. But there is evidence that the ancient Chinese people did in fact believe in the true God.
My grandparents were missionaries in China before they read Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess there was quite a lot of converts, Christians,
Mm-hmm.
but they had to flee when the communists came in.
Oh, I have no doubt. But then keep in mind with the communists, it was any religion they were against. Like their religion was atheism.
Opium for the masses.
Yep. Okay, any questions this evening?